Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, December 20th, and our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
You think I'm your friend? Boy, talk about being presumptuous. Yes, I'm your friend.
Larry, let's start with what has happened in Russia
Mhm.
after all these difficulties in Syria, Georgia, Romania, and with this assassination, which was by far the most important figure that was assassinated by Ukrainians.
Right.
How do you find the situation right now in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, it's real simple. Ukraine's losing, and with every passing day, they're getting more desperate. And these, this assassination of Kirillov was a good example of that desperation. All it's earned them is, Russia's stepping up its strikes, and they hit a command center earlier today in Russia that killed some high-ranking Ukrainian officers. So there's nothing that Ukraine is doing that's going to change the situation on the battlefield and advance its position.
How about the situation with the Biden administration right now? Let me play a clip from Jake Sullivan and the way he's trying to picture the conflict in Ukraine.
I think as democracies to think, oh, we're not doing so great, and those dictators are so strategic and they're doing so well. If I had told you 3 years ago that Joe Biden was going to announce a special military operation to take Ottawa in a week, and 3 years later he was in the wheat fields of Manitoba losing thousands of soldiers a month, with inflation over 10% and interest rates in America over 20%, 600,000 Americans either dead or wounded, and we're inching out little Canadian town by little Canadian town.
Because this is the Trump plan, by the way. I don't know if you know this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have said, you wouldn't sit here saying, wow, America's really winning that war in a big way. That's great for America. You would never say that. But somehow we're saying, oh, the Russians, they're doing great. They are not doing great. They set out on a strategic objective of taking the capital, Kiev, wiping Ukraine as we know it off the map. Maybe not literally wiping the country off the map, but wiping
regime.
a democratic,
Taking the regime out.
independent, Western-oriented Ukraine. Gone. It would be a vassal state to Russia.
Yep.
And they have failed in that, and they will fail in that. They are now fighting and imposing huge costs, and I don't want to discount those costs. But let's not forget that Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, Ukraine will stand at the end of this, and the thing we can most do is create circumstances for a negotiation where they have some strength and capacity behind them, and it is not imposed upon them. And that's what I would like to see in the months ahead. And frankly, I believe that whether it was President Trump, which it will be, or it were President Harris, had she won, this turn to negotiations is something that Zelensky was looking to do.
It was necessary, yeah.
Now we have an opportunity, but that opportunity should rest on the proposition that Ukraine is in the driver's seat and is not going to have an outcome imposed upon it.
Well, and NATO is stronger, and people are spending more money and more committed to it, and there are 2 additional members, and I mean, Assad just fell, and I mean, there are a lot of ways that anyone objective can say the Russians are not winning.
Larry, what's the problem with the definition that Jake Sullivan is giving us?
It's delusional. It's out of touch with reality. Let's start with, we don't see a single video on social media out of Russia showing Russian recruiters tackling people in the street, trying to stuff them into a car with people fighting, running away. The only place you see that is in Ukraine, all across Ukraine. In Russia, in fact, at a minimum 30,000 people a month. So roughly 1,000 people a day are signing up to join the Russian military. Ukraine has an incredible manpower shortage. And even with the numbers that they are forcibly dragging off the street, they're still not able to replace their losses. They're losing between 40 to 50,000 men a month. And that's combined killed and wounded. And that's been going on now for about 6 months. So that just alone in the last 6 months, Ukraine has suffered 300,000 casualties at a minimum. And that's very simply explained. Here's Jake Sullivan said, "Oh yeah, Russia's not, it's losing." That was his message. Well, unlike the United States, Russia actually can build and supply its troops with 155 millimeter shells. The United States cannot provide Ukraine what it needs with shells. Ditto for Patriot missiles, ditto for HIMARS. Across the board, what has been exposed in the course of this 3-year war is that the United States is actually a paper tiger when it comes to industrial production for military needs. It cannot sustain production levels that are required for this, let's call it industrial scale war. Sullivan completely misrepresents Russia's intentions, creates a straw man that, oh, Russia, they wanted to take over, not Kiev, they wanted to seize all of Ukraine. Okay, show me one clip where Vladimir Putin said that. In fact, that any Russian official said that. From the outset, they've said something completely different, which is we're going to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. And they always point to the fact that the Russian soldiers were surrounding Kiev in February and March of 2022, and then they withdrew. Well, why did they withdraw? Not because they were under military pressure from Kiev and the Ukrainians, but because they had negotiated, they'd concluded the initial round of negotiations with Ukraine in Turkey that would have actually put an end to the conflict. And Russia at that time had agreed on paper to allow Ukraine to retain the Donbass, the republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. In exchange, though, for rock-solid guarantees that the rights of the Russian speakers in those provinces would be protected. And then what happened? Biden, Lloyd Austin, with the help of Boris Johnson, thank God, no relation to me, charged in and told Zelensky, no, you're not going to do this. Cancel it. They canceled it. And then the West was convinced that it could win this war against Ukraine. And they haven't, by any measure. If you've been watching what's taken place particularly over the last 6 months, is the pace of Russia's advances into the territory of Ukraine has accelerated, not decelerated. It's expanded at a much more rapid pace. And right now, when the key areas that are being attacked in the Donbass, Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, Toretsk, when they fall, there really is no significant defensive line between those points and the Dnieper River, which means the Russian troops will likely advance pretty rapidly towards the Dnieper. So what's concerning is, I don't think Sullivan was deliberately lying. I mean, what he said were lies. Not true. But if he really believes what he's saying, it shows you how out of touch with reality he is. And you know, I think I've told you before the story of my nephew who had never played a down of organized football when he was in high school. And yet, here he was, 19 years old, barely weighed 150 pounds, and he announced one day that he was going to go try out for a professional football team, the Kansas City Chiefs. And he was going to be a defensive back. Now, he was sincere. He wasn't kidding. And he was crazy because there was no way that was going to happen. He was physically not big enough, not fast enough, had never played. But that's an example. That's sort of what Jake Sullivan reminds me of my crazy nephew.
Do you think that as time goes by, before Donald Trump takes office in Washington, are we going to have any sort of escalation, maybe dirty bomb, nuclear bombs, tactical nuclear bombs? What would be the next move on the part of the Biden administration, in your opinion?
Well, we're already seeing the escalation. Ukraine fired some more ATACMS into the Kursk region just today. They had fired some Storm Shadows and ATACMS into near, I think it was Rostov-on-Don the other day, earlier this week. And so Russia has responded to that earlier attack of ATACMS and Storm Shadows. So Ukraine is stepping up. I mean, it is lashing out. It's doing the equivalent of, throwing haymakers. It's just, punching wildly. And that's what you see with somebody who's in their death throes. They're dying. And so Russia's trying to manage this to keep it from spiraling out of control, but they're not sitting back and just agreeing to be a punching bag. Is there a risk that this could escalate into something nuclear? Yeah, there's a real risk of that. Part of that's connected to we've had these reports in the United States of this unusual drone activity that these drones are flying along certain specified corridors near the east coast of the United States and around some military bases, and the administration doesn't appear to have a clue about what it is, or they're saying, "No, never mind, nothing to see here." Like that iconic scene from the movie Naked Gun with Leslie Nielsen, where he's standing there telling people, "Nothing to see here," and meanwhile in the background, a missile's going off, a building's exploding, bombs are falling. That's sort of what's going on in the United States right now, with claiming nothing to see here, and yet one thing I'm hearing is there's concern that Ukraine has sent some nuclear material, is trying to stage a false flag in the United States that will be blamed on Russia, so that to get the United States to attack Russia. So, again, I don't know if that's true or not. There's no good explanation for this activity, but that's one thing that could happen. Ukraine is in a position to reportedly have nuclear material still in its possession. So, that I don't put anything past them as the reality of their defeat starts to sink in, because they're losing now, and they can see the end of the road approaching.
Here is what Donald Trump said about it, Larry.
That are flying around New Jersey ports. It seems like the American people have a big disconnect.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense. I can't imagine it's the enemy, because if it was the enemy, they'd blast it out. Even if they were late, they'd blast it. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should, because the people are really, I mean, they happen to be over Bedminster.
We
Want to
should
know
be
the
down.
truth.
Why?
They're very close to Bedminster. I think maybe I won't spend the weekend in Bedminster. I've decided to cancel my trip.
Have you received an intelligence briefing on the drones?
I don't want to comment on that.
Have you been
Do you have any reason to think they're?
Yeah, he knows what's going on, Larry, but why are they? It's so suspicious, as you've mentioned, and
Yeah.
why they're not talking about it? And this is so strange. Donald Trump said it's strange, but
Yeah.
if Ukraine is behind this and maybe doing some sort of false flag operation in the United States, or maybe they would put blame on Iran and say Iran is behind this. Who?
Yeah, well,
In
I
your
think I think that's part. I think they believe that there is a real threat out there. In fact, I wrote about this last night at Sonar 21. If there is a concern about nuclear material or a nuclear device being smuggled into the United States, then the entity that would be looking for it is not the Department of Defense. That would be it falls under the responsibility of the Department of Energy. There is a special capability in the Department of Energy that's called the Nuclear Emergency Support Team. Back when I was working, it was called the Nuclear Emergency Search Team, NEST. NEST has the capability. I don't know if they've now got drone capability. I would imagine they do. I would be sort of surprised if they didn't. But this is a top secret organization, and it's designed to work sort of in the shadows, in the darkness, without drawing attention. I have heard from a friend in the military who's familiar with sort of the intelligence side of the house, and he just my friend just noted that there are senior Air Force officials that are getting very frustrated because they're not actually being kept out of the loop. They're not being read in. So this appears to be handled as something highly classified. Now, why is that? Yeah, a variety of reasons. That it's actually a real threat. They're trying to deal with it without alarming the American people. That it's a fabrication. They're trying to stage something in order to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president. So, those are at least, two theories or hypotheses about what's going on. But the fact that, when Trump said the government knows, that means he's been briefed on it. And the fact that he's been briefed tells me that this is an activity that's contained within a what would be known as a special access program, which I think is, for me, increases the likelihood that it's something that involves the Nuclear Emergency Support Team looking for something, and they don't know what. This is this is another thing that could happen that's very dangerous. Sorry about that. What in the world? I'm getting all sorts of phone calls here. Something's going on.
Maybe it's happening right now.
Yeah. I've just had, while we were talking, I've had calls from Russia Today and Iranian TV. So I don't know what's going on.
Larry, when right now Zelensky is asking for more air defense systems, if I'm not mistaken, 19 more air defense systems so far. And on the other hand, he's asking for the technology and the license from the United States to Ukraine, and they want the capability to produce them in Ukraine. Do you think, let's assume that the United States decides to negotiate or whatever to put an end to the conflict, are they going to give the license? Are they going to give the technology to Ukrainians to produce them in Ukraine?
Yeah, where would Ukraine produce those? There's not a single area in Ukraine where they can safely produce something that Russia can't destroy. And Russia demonstrated that with that Oreshnik missile that it fired 3 weeks ago. And it continues to attack a variety of sites. Like I said that earlier today, the reports now coming out is that Russia hit an SBU command center and killed a variety of a number of high-ranking SBU officers and personnel. So, and Zelensky can ask, you know, it's sort of funny. We're at the time of Christmas and in the world of Western Christianity, and kids all over the world are asking for presents. You know, Mommy, Daddy, I'd like to tell Santa to bring me a pony. Zelensky would be better off going to a shopping mall and sitting on Santa's lap and asking for those things. He might have a better chance of getting them from Santa than he is from the United States, because the United States doesn't have them to give. You know, he would like 19 new Patriot missile batteries. Well, so would the United States. They don't have those available. So, this war has exposed the fact that the United States is a lot like the Wizard of Oz. You know, we pretend to be the great and powerful Oz, the most magnificent military in the world. But then when it comes to saying, hey, can you keep us with a steady supply of artillery shells or air defense systems? The United States says, well, that's going to be a problem. Yeah, we can get it for you in, how about 3 years? Well, that's not, I don't think Ukraine will exist as a country in 3 years. So this is, again, what you're watching with Zelensky and making these kinds of demands, requests. It's just the desperation of the moment. He's a drowning man without a life preserver.
Do you see the United States getting prepared for a war of attrition, for the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine? Because I don't see any sort of conflict in Taiwan would be a war of attrition. It's not even possible. The only possibility of having a war of attrition would be two possibilities in the Middle East and in Ukraine, to provide Israel with ammunition, with whatever they need to fight, and Ukraine. Is the United States going to change its strategy? So far, we haven't seen. How about the capabilities right now?
Wait. Let me stop you there. The United States strategy? You think the United States has a strategy? Strategy implies that you actually have a clear objective in mind, and then you've put together a plan to get from point A to point Z. I don't see the United States as having that kind of defined strategy. What I do see is that the United States, at best, their strategy, we've talked about this in our previous conversations, it's whack-a-mole. They want to weaken Russia. Okay, so they're gonna try all these different strategies of using Ukraine as a battering ram, trying to stir up unrest in Georgia, trying to wean Armenia away from the Collective Security Organization, the CSTO, that Armenia has been a part of with Russia, to try to split Russia and China. Yeah, that's the broader strategy of the United States. But again, to what end? When you accomplish, if you accomplished all those things, what does that mean? Oh, we get all of the resources in Russia. Without it sitting down and weighing, what are the possible blowbacks, consequences? What happens if Russia and China decide to oppose us and fight us? All of a sudden, we're the ones who are weak. We've seen that with the United States doing, imposing sanctions on China, and then China turned around and said, "Okay, we're no longer going to send you some critical rare earth minerals like antimony." And you say, "Well, so what?" Well, antimony is an essential ingredient, if you will, in making explosives. So, excuse me, we got draining sinuses today. And using an inability to make explosives then would cripple the United States. Again, the United States is not thinking this through. So yes, in the last days of the Biden administration, they're not showing any kind of restraint at all. It's like they don't care if they wreck the car, then leave Trump with a disaster. Now, that said, Trump coming in, yes, his instincts are to try to negotiate solutions and settlements, but we got evidence that the intelligence community is lying. They are deliberately misrepresenting to Donald Trump the situation, at least in Ukraine, and I suspect the same applies to the Middle East and to in China. Specifically, and when I saw this the other day, I was shocked. But we saw Trump talking about the casualties that are being suffered by the Russians and the Ukrainians. And he gave a number for the Russians that was simply parroting Ukrainian lies. Ukraine always insists, "Oh, we're killing a whole lot more Russians than they're killing us." But it just doesn't make sense, because for every one artillery shell that the Ukrainians are firing, Russia's firing 7 to 10 more back at them. So just the sheer volume of fire means that Ukraine's going to sustain more casualties because Russia's just firing more at them. It's a math problem. But here's Trump repeating what clearly he's been briefed on by the CIA briefers, or the briefers who I guess they now come out of the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI. Well, that's a problem, because when you are armed with bad information, you're going to make bad decisions. And so that's where I don't see the United States in a position to really fix or bring an end to any of these situations, because at the heart we're doing it based on a lot of bad premises.
By the way, the number that Donald Trump gave us, about 600,000 Russians being killed and wounded in conflict. It was the same number that we've heard right now from Jake Sullivan in this interview.
Yeah.
And the source is the same.
Well, that just underscores my point that this is the intelligence community is telling the leadership this. And then to what end? Why would they lie? Oh boy, and come up with a whole list of reasons why they're lying. What they're doing is they're relying on the intelligence provided by Ukraine. And they're not taking, there's a whole number of independent steps that they could take to corroborate the information that they're receiving from Ukraine, but they're not doing that. So that's what I'm saying. When you've got bad information, it leads to bad policy.
Larry, here is Anthony Blinken talking about Ukraine and NATO.
Mm-hmm.
requires NATO membership. That's the only
one way-
security guarantee.
That would be one way to do it, but not the only way.
Let's
And-
talk about the other way. So they've felt like they've had security guarantees before,
Yeah.
going back to 1994 when they gave up
Budapest
their
Memorandum.
nuclear weapons, and felt like anything short of that, Russia will do exactly what you said, just refit and reattack. The U.S., Germany, a few of the other NATO countries are standing in the way of Ukraine joining.
No, we're not standing in the way. We put Ukraine on a path to NATO membership. And successive summits of the NATO alliance have been very clear about that.
Is that a near-term thing, or?
So here's what we did at the last summit, because I think our focus has to be not simply on hortatory policy, the things that we say, but what is it we're actually doing to move Ukraine down that path? We set up for the first time in NATO's history a dedicated command whose purpose is to help Ukraine along that path, to take the practical steps that it needs to take in continuing to build and reform its military institutions, to continue to strengthen its democracy that are necessary for membership. And we are moving Ukraine down that path. Now, ultimately, I believe, yes, Ukraine will be and should be in NATO, and Article 5 is the best guarantor we have. By the way, just a quick parenthesis on this. We have an alliance now, a NATO alliance, that's obviously bigger than it was before with 2 new members, that's stronger than it's been, that's better resourced, that's better positioned. And this, to me, is the single best guarantee against war, against conflict, against aggression. Because the unique bargain that NATO members make, and that I know, people forget, don't think about, understandably, is Article 5, is the notion that an attack on one is an attack on all. And that says to any would-be aggressor anywhere, if I take on one NATO member, I've got to take them all on. And I think that's the fundamental reason why you haven't seen Russia attack a NATO member, and the fundamental reason why the alliance has been the single best deterrent against expanded Russian aggression. So yes, this is I think the best thing. But there are other kinds of assurances, commitments, guarantees that could be part of any arrangements that are made that I think would also have that kind of effect. For example, we have European countries that have talked about the possibility, if there is a ceasefire and a resolution, of having some of their forces along the ceasefire line to patrol it, to protect it, to ensure it. That wouldn't be a bad guarantee either. Meanwhile, we've put in place with 24 countries now bilateral security agreements between those countries and Ukraine that are 10-year programs, 10-year commitments to help Ukraine build its deterrent and defense capacity. As that continues to move forward, Ukraine will be stronger and stronger, and the losses that Russia has taken through this are absolutely extraordinary. The fact that...
Yeah, there he goes again.
Larry.
God, I mean, unbelievable.
First of all, Larry, one of the points that he has mentioned about those nuclear bombs or nuclear capabilities that Ukraine had, which was removed, which were Russian capabilities, were not Ukrainian.
They were Russian weapons. They did not belong to Ukraine. So that,
and whenever they talk about it, it seems that they were Ukrainian capabilities that were removed from Ukraine, which is the reason that Ukraine is not capable of defending itself. But the point, Larry, in this talk of Antony Blinken, it seems that in a long run, he's thinking of improving and making a better army for Ukraine, as they did before this conflict, since 2014 up until 2022, which this conflict started. It seems the same old policy. They're going to do the same again and again because they want to continue this conflict, Larry. When you think of it, it's the same.
well, this effort's been underway by the West, with the United States in the lead, since 1997. Starting in 1997, that was the first agreement for military cooperation signed between, let's say, NATO and Ukraine, and particularly with the United States in the lead. And starting in 1997, the NATO countries began doing military exercises with Ukraine. Now, people say, well, so what? A military exercise is an event that's carefully scripted, and that it entails creating scenarios that allow your military forces and leadership to interact with the military forces and leadership of, in this case, Ukraine. And there's no way to disguise it. It's all about preparing Ukraine to fight alongside NATO troops against Russia. Okay, so the West, the United States and NATO in particular, have been aggressors. Now, the exercise program didn't really get kicked off and go into high gear until 2008. And when we're talking these exercise programs, some of them are what they call tabletops, where they sit around and you pretend, you talk about which units need to be alerted and who needs to be called up. But some of them actually entailed having U.S. Marines in amphibious landing craft landing on the shores of Ukraine in the Black Sea. Now, if you're Russia sitting there watching this, what you're seeing is the West getting prepared to attack you. And that didn't start. That's been going on. And then, again, against this backdrop, you had the United States and the United Kingdom, through their intelligence agencies, providing support to Islamic extremists that were involved in the Chechen war. And that war was a war of terrorism against Russia. So that was another form of violence directed against Russia. During the course of this entire relationship that the United States tried to say, we want Ukraine and NATO, they were building up the Ukrainian army. So when this special military operation started, I believe Ukraine had, close to its full military strength is about 700,000. And, I have to go back and check the numbers, but that's what I recall. And, the average age of the soldiers in the Ukrainian military at the time, I believe, was like 26, 25. Well, enormous numbers of those soldiers have died. But the army that existed in February of 2022 no longer exists. It's gone. It's been destroyed and replaced, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And with that replacement, now the average age of the Ukrainian soldier is 40. And maybe older. So you're an engineering background. You're good at math. That means that the vast majority of the folks that are in your military now are a bunch of old guys, not young guys. And the demographic reality in Ukraine is they don't have a bunch of young people that they can draft and coerce and bring into the service. So this is delusional thinking by Blinken. Again, it's just out of touch with reality. You could make the case that in February of 2022, Ukraine effectively had the second or third largest army in NATO. Even though it was not a NATO member, it was being treated like a member of NATO because of every year they're conducting NATO exercises with Ukraine. That base out in western Ukraine, Yavoriv, was the de facto NATO headquarters inside Ukraine. Ukraine has suffered devastating losses. Russia hasn't. Then, it's real easy. It's real easy to track it. Just look at social media. Russia's social media is not filled with images and movies, photos of cemeteries and grieving families. Social media on the Ukrainian side is. To use your overhead satellites to take pictures of the cemeteries throughout Russia and throughout Ukraine. Which country is digging more graves? That's Ukraine, not Russia. So it is, look at the obituaries that are being posted in media. in newspapers. That's they've used it in one group in Media Zona in Great Britain has been tracking it in Russia. They've come up with 82,000 Russian deaths. Now that's an enormous, that's a terrible loss of life, but it pales because what's going on in Ukraine is 10 times that at least dead. At least well over 800,000, and it's more likely approaching 1 million. And Ukraine is much smaller population-wise than Russia. Russia's 140 million. Ukraine on a good day is 25 million people now. So it just, none of it adds up in terms of victory for Ukraine. And that's why people like Blinken and Sullivan, they don't care. It's not their friend, their father, their brother, their cousin that's dying. Those are Ukrainians. Who cares about them? They're just a bunch of meaningless foreigners as far as the United States. We enjoy killing foreigners, okay? We did it in Vietnam. We've done it in Iraq twice. We've done it in Afghanistan. We're doing it in Syria. We've done it in Libya. We've done it in Somalia. The United States is a death machine for the rest of the world. And it is, at some point, it's got to come to an end.
Larry, do you see Keith Kellogg helping Donald Trump the way that he's talking right now about the conflict in Ukraine? It doesn't seem that much of change from the Biden administration.
No. Kellogg doesn't have a clue. Now, is he willing to open his mind and take a step back, take an objective look, and say, okay, let's look at the reality of what's going on. Let's listen to what the Russians have said. But he's not listening. They're not paying attention. It's not like Putin and Lavrov and Gerasimov and Medvedev that they've been speaking in some sort of coded sign language. Oh, we're not going to tell the Americans what our real goals are. We're going to be as opaque and evasive as possible. They've been very upfront. We're not going to allow you to bring Ukraine into NATO under no circumstances. That's why we went to war. That's why we're going to demilitarize. We're going to destroy the military of Ukraine so they can't threaten us. And we're putting you on notice that if you persist in threatening us, that you too will become a target. The United States and Europe continues to push this crap that Russia's the one who's out to build an empire. Russia's the one that wants to attack Europe. Russia's not conducted a single military exercise outside of its territory directed at attacking any of the European countries or the United States. Not one. Dozens have been conducted by Europe and the United States against Russia. Dozens. So, I mean, it's just, the facts tell a completely different story.
Shifting the gear to the conflict in the Middle East, Larry. Right now, we had a meeting between Iran, Egypt, Turkey, all these countries together talking about Syria. How do you see right now the new policies coming from these key countries in that region toward Syria?
Well, Egypt's meaningless. They're a non-player in it. Turkey, I think, has bitten off more than it can chew. Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, when he went to talk with Erdogan, I think more of their discussion centered on what are we going to do about the Kurds, because both you can say that Turkey and Iran have maybe some common interests and they don't want to see the Kurds as an independent country. And so, maybe coordinating strategies on how to contain that. A lot of the Western pundits saw that, oh yeah, Iran's a big loser and being forced out of Syria. There were already signs that Assad was not a full cooperating partner of Russia or of Iran in the 6 months leading to this implosion that took place 2 weeks ago. Syria as an entity no longer exists, and it's going to be a mess. It's going to be a chaotic mess. And Turkey, the one interest, it's fascinating with respect to Iran. Early on, they recognized the threat posed by groups like ISIS, and then its successors, al-Nusra, now HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that this kind of radical Islam, and it was inspired out of the Sunni faction, was a danger. And that's why both Iran and Hezbollah were fighting ISIS, which should have made them allies of the United States. And so, yeah, here was again the United States on the one hand claiming that, oh yeah, we're fighting ISIS, but then on the other hand, finding ways to work with, provide aid, training to those very Islamic groups that we claim that we're fighting. And then here again, once again, we backed this Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the current head of HTS, and dressing him up like he's a bearded Mahatma Gandhi, to bring peace to Syria. I do not believe that he has undergone a change where he's awakened and said, "Oh my God, I was this Sunni radical, and oh boy, was I wrong. Oh no, I'm going to embrace the joy, the love of Christians and the love of Jews, and yes, we're going to join hands and sing 'We Are the World.'" Nonsense. That's the lie that's being pushed. So he's dressed up to appear that something that he's not. He's got a beheading or two under his belt. And the State Department, the funny thing is, on the one hand, you got the CIA working with this guy, and on the other hand, the State Department still has a $10 million price tag on his head. So it just further, again, the United States, when you look at U.S. policy in the Middle East, in Russia, in Ukraine, it's all about destroying, creating war, creating mayhem. It's not about bringing peace at all. And that's why, I've become more and more outspoken about this. Somebody needs to stop the United States. We need to stop ourselves. And the American people actually voted for that, I think, in supporting Donald Trump. They don't want any more of these stupid wars. But we can't help ourselves. I mean, but that's why I describe us, we're like a serial rapist. And, you got to lock us up because we're not willing to change our ways. You're muted.
Yeah. Can you hear me right now?
Now I hear you. You sound like a bad telephone commercial. Can you hear me now?
Larry, Erdogan, he's saying that it must be said loudly that Israel's occupation of the lands in Syria is unacceptable, and they're going to continue cornering Israel. Do you see that the way that Assad is gone, Iran is not there anymore, the way it was, Russia is not there the way they were there, and right now is Turkey and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And in your opinion, are we heading towards some sort of political or maybe military conflict between Turkey and Israel?
Eventually, yes, both political and military. Of course, you know, Erdogan, as I've said before, he's a windbag, okay, and then he's egotistical, but it's not unique to him, to Turkey. Make the same claim about lots of leaders around the world. But, he says one thing, has been very strong in condemning Israel. And yet in this particular operation to get rid of Assad, the Israeli intelligence, Mossad, was invited in to work with the Turks in getting rid of Assad. At the same time, Turkey allows and facilitates the flow of oil to Israel, which keeps Israel in the war. So, Turkey's an enabler of Israel's military operations and activities. The thing it's going to do Israel in is it doesn't have the manpower. It's taking this additional territory. Great. Where are you going to get the soldiers to cover that? Because that's more territory. So now you got to cover Gaza, you got to cover the West Bank, you got to cover southern Lebanon. Now you got to cover more in the Golan Heights. So Israel's 7-8 million people total. It's about in fact, I think New York City may be larger than Israel. So it doesn't have an enormous amount of personnel. So it is a problem.
Yeah, Erdogan is talking about that Assad is not there anymore. The West has to lift its sanctions on Syria. And there is an interview recently, the foreign minister of Turkey talking with Al Jazeera, in which he said, in my opinion, he was mentioning that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the West is going to lift the sanctions. We're going to do that. We're going to help them. We're going to help them with any means at our disposal.
Yeah.
Do you think that the situation in Syria, Larry, is so tricky right now? Israel is feeling, or I don't know, at least it's showing us that they're winning with the situation in Syria. But what we're witnessing right now, that Iran, Russia, Turkey, they are all changing, just modifying their policy in Syria. It doesn't seem to be a win for Israel in a long run.
Well, in the long term, it's not going to be. Again, there's just the logistics required to sustain military presence, security presence, and control that territory. The Israeli military is already under stress from its operations in Gaza and the West Bank and into southern Lebanon. And Turkey, Turkey talks a good game. Let's see what they do. They don't have good control over HTS. They're making noise that I keep seeing reports that they've entered into Kurdish territory and they're fighting the Kurds already. Well, the Kurds are not going to lay back and give up. They're going to fight back. They'll fight they've been this war of terror launched by the Kurdish Workers' Party, the PKK. Good God, that's been going on 50 years. Has not gone away and is not likely to go away. And let's not forget that you've got a significant number of Turks living in places like Germany, which, they can provide outside support that goes back to the Kurds that are living, they come out of Turkey that are living in Germany. So they'll provide support to the Kurds to fight against Turks. So this is these ethnic religious differences have, they were kept under some control during Assad. Now it's just as we saw once Tito fell in Yugoslavia, once he went away, the the scab was ripped off, and you got this suppurating wound, and then you got the war in the Balkans and the Serbs, the Croats, the Bosniaks, the Slovenians, going at each other. And that's what's going to happen in Syria. It is, and just because 75% are Sunni doesn't mean that 75% Sunni think and act as a bloc. They don't. There are tribal activities, and the other thing that's most of these commentators in the West are ignoring is the role of the criminal organizations that have been, moving drugs in particular, drugs and weapons. Think they're going away? They're going out of business? They're going to have a sale. Hey, red letters. It's Red Letter Friday. Come, 50% off. No. They're actually going to be a significant force. They've got the money. They've got the weapons. So, there's not a peaceful solution here on the horizon.
Is the outcome of what has happened in Syria going to improve the relationship between Iran and Turkey and that rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Iran seems pretty intent on avoiding actions that will make it isolated. They see they've been listening to Russia, and Iran very well could have justifiably attacked Israel again in retaliation for the October 1st attacks by Israel on Iran. It's vowed that it's going to do that, but it hasn't done it yet. And I think one of the reasons it hasn't done it yet is it is trying to show that, hey, we're the reasonable ones here. We're not the nation of terrorists. I'm working on a piece looking at how the State Department in its annual country reports on terrorism portrays Iran. Every single report, Iran, the leading sponsor of terrorism. And yet, in particular over the last 10 years, when they get in there and they talk about, well, who's actually carrying out most of the terrorist attacks? Oh, well, that'd be the Sunni groups, the ISIS, the groups that are backed by the Saudis, not by Iran. And Iran, they blame Iran for a lot of, quote, terrorism because Iran supported the Shia population in Iraq after the United States invaded. We never like to take into account that we cause a lot of it. We're invaders. We're foreign invaders. How do you think we in the United States would respond if the Iraqi army invaded West Virginia and started trying to round up all the terrorist leaders? You got some people up there with some firearms that would be shooting and killing them. And they'd be labeled as terrorists by the Iraqis, just as the United States labeled all these Iraqis as terrorists. When we were the aggressor, not them, we were the aggressor. So, what I see going on here is Iran's trying to say, we're not this terrorist state that the West tries to portray us as. We're a country that's protecting our interests, protecting our people. But that doesn't make us terrorists.
Do you see Israel attacking Iran before Donald Trump takes office in the United States?
I think it's highly likely. I hope it doesn't happen because when that happens, this is going to again spin off into some dimensions that will. Let's clarify the assumptions. I am assuming that Iran's air defense system is still largely intact, and that Iran has a capability to retaliate in a significant way, that it could destroy major parts of Israel. The Israelis and the lot in Washington, in the Biden administration, have alternative assumptions. They assume that Iran's air defense has been shattered, that Iran's ability to retaliate militarily is not there, that Iran is riven with internal political divisions, and therefore any attack by Israel will succeed, and it will maybe destabilize the regime and force the mullahs out. Okay, so two different sets of assumptions. If I'm right, then any attack by Israel is going to turn out to be an unmitigated disaster. If I'm wrong, then the people of Iran are going to enter into the list of casualties, and it's going to the world's going to be more destabilized. But I'm hoping Israel doesn't do it, but they've not shown any kind of restraint in any other area. So why should they start now?
If Israel was capable of destroying the air defense system of Iran, why did they not provided us with the satellite images and something like that to show the outcome? Because they're so perfect in showing, in exaggerating what they're doing.
Yeah, no, that's it exactly. They've shown there were a couple of satellite images of some damage here and there, but nothing extensive. And again, what people don't understand, these are mobile. The air defense systems that Iran uses are mobile. They're not fixed. We've seen both from the United States. The United States has far superior ISR capabilities, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities in Israel. And we can't even find mobile launchers in Yemen, a much smaller area. And we've been working at that for more than a year. And those damn Houthis, they keep firing missiles off into Israel despite all, and they keep shutting down maritime traffic in the Red Sea. And that's after more than a year of the United States Navy, the U.S. military, trying to stop them. We couldn't. That's why I say more disconnect from reality. And when I bring this up to some people here in the States, they go, "Oh, that's just because we're not trying." Oh, nonsense. God, stop making excuses for being failures.
We know that Elon Musk and those people who are more sane in the Trump administration are not willing to have any sort of war, not in Europe, in Ukraine, or putting an end to the conflict in Ukraine, or with Iran in the Middle East.
Right.
Who's going to prevail, in your opinion, and who has the upper hand?
Well, I mean, Trump. Look, we already saw when Trump, in his first term, wanted to do an opening to North Korea, and John Bolton and Mike Pompeo fought like hell to prevent that. What happened? Trump went to North Korea. Trump had talks with the chubby little kid,
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un. So it showed that Trump, despite getting advice and opposition from his national security director, from the head of the CIA, and even the head of State Department, went ahead and did what he wanted to do. So there's that hope. I think Trump is genuinely committed to trying to pursue peace, not start a war. But I am troubled by, he's trying to end the hostage crisis in Gaza, and to get Hamas to give up the hostages by making these bellicose threats that do this or else there'll be hell to pay. That, again, when Trump says stuff like that, makes him look stupid. What does he think the Palestinian people have been suffering for the last year? If that's not the definition of hell, I don't know what is. Their homes destroyed, their churches, mosques, all places of worship destroyed, health hospitals destroyed, schools destroyed, cultural centers destroyed. water treatment destroyed, sewage treatment destroyed. That's hell. And yet they're still fighting because they're fighting for their freedom.
When you look at the pictures of Gaza before and after, it's unbelievable, Larry.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
everything's destroyed.
Yeah. No, and the world has stood by and done nothing. The United States has facilitated it, enabled it. You know, it's a crime. That's why, you know, at least it's been defined correctly as genocide. And, you know, the Israelis can, you know, cry Holocaust all that they want, when in fact they are now the perpetrators of a Holocaust.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Yeah. Always come to me for the uplifting news, right? All right, my friend, you have a good weekend and we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah. See you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.